to the Wappingers Historical Society Speaker Series. It's great to see so many of you here. My name is Beth Devine, and I'm president of the Historical Society. I'd like to thank Laura Lando in the back, who is chair of our Speaker Series, for arranging this program tonight. But first I want to give you a quick plug for our upcoming event, Stones and Bones, a living history tour through the Wappingers Wappingers Rural Cemetery, where you will meet some very interesting local residents who happen to reside there. Tickets are available online. I understand 4 of the 6 slots are sold out, but there are still a few openings, and we would love to see you. It's a week from this Saturday, September 28th. Also, please, if you haven't already, support our fundraiser. Gift cards galore. It's out there. You can still buy tickets in the lobby after the talk tonight. And that drawing is in November. Tonight's topic, buying, selling, and everyday life in Dutchess County on the eve of the American Revolution. We are so pleased to have Dr. Will Tatum with us. He has served as Dutchess County Historian since October 2012. He holds a BA in History from the College of William and Mary in Virginia and a Master's and PhD in History from Brown University. As Dutchess County Historian, Will designs exhibits, he conducts archival projects, and presents public programming, and I might add, lots of public programming on lots of different topics. So he also coordinates the county history community, which includes the local historians, the historical societies, the preservation groups, and state and federal historic sites. So I'm very anxious to hear how our little corner in the Hudson Valley was tied to a global marketplace of goods long before Amazon and the internet age, and I know you are too. So please help me welcome Dr. Tatum.
All right, I just have to prove. Find out which one's live. Yes, I've got to get photographic proof that so many of you have come out on a Thursday night in beautiful September to hear about old-timey stuff, just so that my boss believes me when I say I was presenting at Wappingers Town Hall. I was not out cavorting in Wappingers, which is also a really fun thing to do. So tonight's program is about something that it's about an experience that people clearly find interesting, but it's about a documentary source that normally causes historians' eyes to roll back inside their head like a horror movie, because this is all about store ledgers. Now, the reason that I got into history is I'm an extremely nosy person. I like to find out just information in general that's hidden, that's inaccessible, and it turns out that's really easy to do when it belongs to super old, deceased people. You know, there's not the levels of protection that most people have. And of course, then it's accepted and you can do programs on them. So what we're talking about tonight is really the mainstay part of everyday life here in Dutchess County in the 18th century. Because think about how much of your stuff today comes from somewhere else. I mean, there might be a handful of farmers with us tonight, but by and large, we rely on a global network of goods, whether it's the stuff we eat, whether it's the stuff we wear, whether it's the entertainment that we consume, all comes from somewhere else. And I think that the dominant idea out there is that, back in the 18th century, back in the colonial period, if you couldn't make it on the farm, you didn't have it. And if you're like really super duper way out, it does get challenging to get stuff. But here in Dutchess County on the eve of the Revolution, you can pretty much get anything you wanted that was available in the rest of the world. Of course, it comes down to a price tag. Is it going to be cheaper in London than it is in Wappinger? Probably. You don't have that transport cost. And for those of you who, like me, might have a little teeny bit of an eBay habit, I like ceramics, you've noticed that the shipping costs have gone up. Well, they're still not at 18th century levels yet, but I'm sure they'll reach that at any point in time. So what we're going to do tonight is look into how the data in these ledgers tells us about the lived experience on an everyday level of these folks. But to begin with, what was life like in 18th century Dutchess County? So throwing you back to the names, dates, places part of your high school education, Dutchess County was established in 1683, and it was established basically to ensure that the state of Connecticut's western border did not end at the Hudson. Between 1687 and 1750, not a whole lot of settlement here. Most of the land is tied up in what we today call land patents, which huge. Rombout patent, where we are today, is roughly 85,000 acres, which sounds great on paper. But when your major means of making money off this land, because the patentees, the folks who got these big parcels, were speculators. It's like, all right, what are we going to do? Well, we've got the mineral rights. That's a tale as old as time. But what we really need are people to settle on this land and farm it. You have to partition that land up. And the royal government, which was only too happy to sell land title to these huge grandee merchants from New York City, was also the same entity that turned around and said, you know what, it's very easy to buy 85,000 acres. It's really difficult now to, separate all of that out into like 150 acre lots. So that delayed settlement throughout Dutchess County until about the 1750s, then things really kick off because they finally figured out how to do basic land partitions. From the 1750s up to the 1790s, you see a massive growth. So what are we talking about in terms of massive growth? In 1714, when Dutchess is finally granted permission to hold its first elections, they had a census to figure out how many people live in the county. Now, of course, they were leaving some people out, like all of the indigenous residents of the county. Most of the folks who are in what we now know as Eastern Dutchess, because the census takers only wanted to go so far in from the river. That's your main artery, your main line of transportation. They counted in 1714, 447 people living in the Dutchess County that included all of modern Putnam County and a pretty significant slice of Columbia County. So well over 1,000 square miles, 447 people, not 447 voters, 447 women, children, men of all ages, of all status, including enslaved individuals, that's it. By the 1770s, you're probably in the range of about, a little bit probably above 10,000. Which still super duper tiny by our standards, and even by the standards of the period, Dutchess County was considered a junior partner. But the big takeaway is there's not a huge population in Dutchess, and most of the people who are here during this colonial era are small batch farmers. They've got like 150, 300 acres here and there. Most of their tax assessments have their value at £1, which is pretty small by period standards. But these people are still tied in to a global economy. So what is shopping like in colonial Dutchess County? A couple of things there, and I realized one of my challenges as a speaker is trying to find a font size that can be read from the back of the room. And I think from having checked this out earlier, I'm not quite there yet. So I apologize to the folks in the back. Next time you see me, they will be even larger fonts. All right, so Dutchess County is part of the Colony of New York. The Colony of New York is part of which empire? Audience participation. British Empire, yes. An empire which, by the 1760s, 1770s, spreads across the globe. And it spreads across the globe because the British government likes having access to all kinds of stuff that cannot be found in their tiny island nation, including, interesting spices, interesting fabrics, metals, basically everything. Because, Great Britain, if you've been there, it's a nice enough place. Their cuisine is fantastic, albeit limited, but they need lots of stuff. The bonus of being part of the British Empire is that you get access to all of this stuff, because the British Navy is out there making sure that fabric from India safely makes it to London to then be reshipped to North America. that sugar and molasses and rum out of the West Indies can travel freely within that imperial system. It's a level of economic protection that's almost unknown again until the Pax Americana comes in after the Second World War, where we become the guarantor of the seas. So you can access all kinds of stuff from everywhere. How you access this stuff, there's clearly no Amazon. You can't get on your made-from-wood computer in 1773 Dutchess County and clack out a message that you want sugar. But you can go to these stores, and there are stores spread throughout the county. They serve fairly large regions. We'll talk about 4 tonight that are the 4 that have been imaged so far, which means I can pour through them and make databases and all that kind of fun stuff that you learn to do in grad school. But they serve massive areas. The Mabbitt's Ledger and the Mabbitt store, for example, which is in the location is modern Millbrook next to the Nine Partners Meeting House, serves most of southeastern Dutchess. So they serve tremendous swathes of territory. You have to go to this store to get your stuff. They hand it to you and you take it away. But how do you pay for all of this? Because there's a downside to being in the British Empire. The upside is, protection of the seas, plenty of stuff coming your way from across the globe. Downside is no hard currency. Because the last thing the British government wants you, as, say, especially a resident of Long Island in the 1760s, 1770s, is buying your rum from the Dutch. Now, the Dutch, of course, charge a much more reasonable price because they aren't adding in all the taxes that the British government likes to collect, especially to pay off the French and Indian War. So, how do you prevent, as British imperial bureaucrats, your people in far-flung areas from buying from the Dutch, the Spanish, the French, all of your competitors? No money. That's no gold, no silver, no copper. Does it exist at a level in the colonies? Yes. And we have a gentleman here tonight in the back who actually has recovered a couple of examples of coinage from really early Republic 1790s and some into the 1770s Dutchess County, who's happy to show any interested people. Yeah, well, there he is. Fantastic. So you don't have hard currency here, which means you can't trade with the Dutch because they want gold, silver, or something like that. It also means you can't go to the store for the most part and just pay off your debts. Be like, I want some sugar, here's coins for it. This becomes a credit system, and it's a somewhat more complicated credit system than we have today, but in every other aspect it's very comparable in terms of credit runs our lives, credit ran their lives. More or less, you are running your entire personal household economy on credit. So these store owners are extremely powerful because they are the lords of credit. They decide who gets a line of credit to buy things from their store, who does not. And for the most part, they're also the people with the connections down to New York City and Long Island, because lots of these stores turn out to be family operations. You write down, it sounds like a mob movie, but no, you write down to your cousin in Long Island and say, send a couple of crates of sugar, we're running pretty low. The amazing part of all of this is that some of these stores are in what, by 18th century standards, are extremely difficult to access places. During this period in time, water is the king of transportation. The only reason that we had a post road running from New York City to Albany, Route 9, is because the river froze way back then. We haven't really had it freeze since the winter of 2014 to 2015 now, but in the 18th century, it froze reliably every year. No Coast Guard cutters to open a channel. So very limited road system, moving heavy cargo, which everything that we'll talk about tonight weighs a lot in quantity. And of course with ceramics, again, my little habit on eBay, very breakable stuff is difficult, but it gets all the way out there. So again, this idea that everyone had to be self-sufficient, that if you couldn't make it, you didn't have it, totally bogus. All right. For tonight, of course, here in Wappinger, you have a rather famous storekeeper. And this is where we begin our lesson on how we do history. So your famous storekeeper is a guy named Peter Messier Jr. He comes up here in 1777 from New York City. And there are kind of three versions of Peter Mazier's story during Wappingers. For those of you who can read this text, the general popular idea is that Peter is down in the city, the British roll in, he's a Tory, okay, that means he's pro-British, but he chooses to leave New York City, which is under British military occupation and thus protection, to move up to Wappingers, in that period, Rondout Precinct, which is not under British occupation and protection, to set up a store and to then lord it over his neighbors so much that sometime in 1777, they decide to ransack the store in an event known as the Wappingers Tea Party. So this is the story, this is the zeitgeist, the local legend. One of the bad things about calling in a historian like me is that I start looking for primary sources to back this stuff up. So we have our published history. My favorite for the county is done by a judge named Frank Hasbrook. He publishes back in 1909. Now this is a slightly different form of history than what I practice. Frank was into the documents, but Frank was also into hanging out with other judges, with merchants, with all of the coolest people in late 19th century, early 20th century Dutchess County, and listening to all the old stories. So his book is a mixture of, yes, we can back some of this stuff up, and no, Frank heard that at the Bar Association dinner in 1895, and he thinks he remembers it correctly. So Frank gives us some other details. He says, all right, the Maziers, they are French Huguenot descendant, which for anyone who's gone to the Western Bank, and my condolences if you've gone to the Western Bank, we're clearly the cooler bank over here on the east, you know that the French Huguenots come into New York relatively early, during the Dutch period even, because they're looking for religious toleration. Frank tells us, of course, that Mazier was an evil Tory. He made a whole lot of money off the British Army. And you know, the people who stayed and occupied New York and sold to the British Army did make a lot of money because the British didn't have a whole lot of shopping options. You know, you leave occupied New York, you're in rebel territory. They don't want to sell you anything. But again, inexplicably, Peter Mazier leaves this safe haven with redcoats on every street corner to move up here to Wappingers, to Rondout Precinct. He sets up shop. In this detail, we get something that's actually borne out by deed documents that he did not buy from Nicholas Brower, who originally owned the property. He had a middleman, which does suggest that Peter might have been a little sketchy. You know, he doesn't want anyone to know that he's buying into the neighborhood. So Matthew Van Boonschoten does the deal, and then Peter sets up shop here, and at the end of the war, his home down in New York City is seized by the new state authorities. But he's otherwise left to his own devices up here in Wappingers, and the Mazier family goes on, they own mills. It's a great time. Now we get into the primary sources, which is where I come in. So we have this thing, you may have heard of it, it's the Ancient Documents Collection. It's all of the filings from the county court between 1721 and 1889. We're about in the 1840s now with indexing, imaging it, and putting it online. So you can see all of these beautiful sources for free on the Dutchess County website. So what does the court tell us about Peter Mazier? Well, the first thing is he starts showing up here in 1763. And he shows up here as a merchant because he's appearing in the civil court, suing people to whom he has extended credit. It's like, come shop at my place, buy my stuff, you're good for it, I know, until they aren't good for it. They don't pay back, and at that point the store owner will take them to court to get damages awarded, which is a little bit of circular thinking because if they can't pay their bill in the first place, do you think that a judgment with damages on top of that is going to magically solve the situation? I mean, I'm a historian, not a mathematician or a businessman, but something feels a little off. The good news is, that means we can say Peter is up here, and he's in the company of Jacob van Voorhees, another Van Voorhees big Dutchess County family, doing business as a merchant, selling stuff by 1763, maybe earlier. So he has a relationship with Dutchess County from long before the war. Now we know that this is not his primary place of residence because we have this bond from 1767, where he's loaning out 900 pounds to a Yelverton. And in 18th century Dutchess County, do not lend money to Yelvertons. That is going to end poorly for everyone. So we have this bond from Yelverton promising, I will pay you back, I swear. Now, for our purposes, it identifies Peter as Peter Mazier Jr. of the City of New York merchant. A lot of folks who resided in Dutchess County listed their, I know this sounds funny and modern, but it's straight up 18th century. They listed a business address down in New York City. So folks you meet today who are like, yeah, I do business in the city, but I live in Fishkill or Wappingers. They're just following a time-honored tradition here. So 1767, we know for sure he's a merchant. We know for sure that he is operating in the city. All right, so tax rolls. Again, another source of information that causes many historians' eyes to roll into the back of their head. Because as you can see in the front row, my apologies to the back row, it's just a list of names and numbers. But for 1777, we have, oh, and it's a TV screen, so my pointer doesn't work. But if you look down here, you will see a listing for Matthew Van Boonschoten and Peter Mazier in Rondout Precinct. Peter does not appear in the 1776 or 1775 tax rolls. So we have primary source documentation now that he's a full-time resident of Dutchess County in 1777 because they don't tax second homes back in the 18th century. Believe it or not, that's something that New York had to learn later on. He's still on the tax rolls going forward in 1779. He's diversified his portfolio. He now has a farm up in Poughkeepsie in addition to his land here in Wappingers. So we can say from primary sources that, all right, he's here doing business at least as early as 1763, but still primary business residence down in the city, and he's definitely here. He is here enough to be taxed in 1777 and never leaves. He's on the tax rolls from then on. We don't really have anything to say that he himself was a Tory. We don't have anything yet. I always leave the door open for any assault on his shop, but we do know that his wife was some form of a naughty person. Yes. Because in 1781, she is summoned to meet with the people that you do not want to meet with in 1781. These are the three chairmen of the Committee for Detecting Conspiracies. Yes, these are the folks who are here finding the closeted loyalists and giving them a couple of options. So Catherine, wife of Peter Mazier, called out in this. She is given the house arrest option, but it's house arrest like. It's simply this: don't leave the territorial boundaries of Dutchess County. If we find that you have left and you come back, it's going to be problematic. We're going to have to elevate this. And right above this crew is the State Committee for Detecting Conspiracies. They are up in Albany. They enjoy trying people in absentia. You don't have to be there to be tried. And then handing around death sentences like Halloween candy. So this warning is kind of like, we've had our eye on you for some time now. You've gotten to a level where we're going to have to do something about it. We're going to give you one last chance because your husband's a really nice guy. We hate to disrupt the family. As far as we can tell, she stays put. Nothing bad happens to her. Peter subsequently shows up in a set of land records, again, eyes roll into the back of your head, which document the sale of confiscated estates. So if you're a loyalist in Dutchess County and you get out by 1777, which is the writing on the wall, in which these same gentlemen at that point in time will show up and say, all right, you've got three choices. Choice number one, you can sign up for the Patriot cause. That's our preferred option. Choice number two, you can spend the duration of the war in the basement of the courthouse in the county jail, which is not heated, and where you will have to pay for your room and board. Imagine renting a jail cell. It's the 18th century, space is limited. Or option number three, you can leave and don't come back, because this is a limited 3-week time offer. So all of these people who leave, and there are roughly a third of the population of Dutchess County in terms of landholders, leave to go down the British lines. Their estates, of course, are unoccupied. What does the state of New York like to do? Make money. What's a great way to make money? Sell all of the confiscated land. But are you going to let just anyone on your committee to sell confiscated Loyalist land? No, you're going to make sure that it's the most reliable people in Dutchess County, whom, thanks to their meticulous records, we can see are selling the land to each other. Yes, so you may think, oh, here's an opportunity. You've got all of these renters on this land. They don't have freehold, they have leasehold. It's like when you live in an apartment. So maybe these guys will do the right thing and sell the land to the people who are living on it. Wrong. It takes another 40 years to deal with that, but that's a different story. Anyway, it shows that Peter is seen as reliable by the folks who are in charge here. So more on that story as it develops. Now back to storekeeping, the shopping experience in 18th century Dutchess. We have this beautiful image up here from the University of Glasgow. This is a female shopkeeper in Glasgow, sometime judging by her clothing between 1790 and 1800. It's up there first because I think it's a cool image. It's up there second because it reminds us that this is not a male-only field. Like, the owner of the store is certainly a guy. It's the 18th century. The people who are actually running the store, very possibly female relations, other connections there. It also gives us an idea of what you would see when you walk into an 18th century store here in Dutchess County. First of all, there are no open stacks. You don't get to browse. You don't get to try to find a box of cereal that doesn't have crushed corners. It's just not going to happen. If you want to find a teapot without a crack in the lid, that's going to be extra. Everything is handed across this shelf, this bar, this counter that the people staffing the shop work from. The goods are arranged behind the staff so that you can see them and point and say, I want, for example, you see this thing that's next to the green thing down on the counter there? That's how sugar comes in the 18th century. We'll get into that in a little bit more detail later, but you point at that and say, I'd like a sugar loaf, please. And they will hand it to you and they will write things down because, again, you don't have a pocket full of change to just hand them. Your name goes into a day book, and it's called that because it is kept day by day on that counter. And whoever is staffing that facility, that store, writes your name down and a list of the things that you bought and how much they cost. This class of document is one of my favorites from 18th century Dutchess County, which is why we scanned 3 of them and got the Dutchess County Historical Society to scan the 4th. So that's entered into the day book. Then sometime, ideally at the end of the day, but sometimes paperwork falls behind, you open the big ledger, the ledger of double entry bookkeeping. If you think QuickBooks is hard, don't go back to the 18th century. That's when the clerk writes down everything you bought and then starts looking with intent, because that's the debit column, at the credit column. How are you going to pay this off? Because there is no such thing as a fully extended line of credit. Now, with these ledgers, we do begin to see how the network of social relations plays out in 18th century Dutchess County. We're not quite there yet with the data entry to map this, but we do have the technology available to make these beautiful spider webs of who's connected to who. And we'll get into that more in just a bit. But first, I know that you are all just tantalized by that idea of double entry bookkeeping. What does it mean? You have a book, you open it up, you have a left page and you have a right page. The left page is the debit column. That is where you put all of the things that people owe you for and how much they owe you. That's the important part. On the right side, the right sheet of paper, is the credit column, and that's where everything that they gave you to offset that credit and how much it is worth, the really important part, goes. So here we have an excerpt from one of our known books, the DeWitt family papers, the DeWitt ledgers. Where on the left, you have a nice long list of everything that Maria Weiss has bought, and on the right, how she's going to pay it off. It's 1764. This is from Statsburg, which at that point in time is a large chunk culturally of southern Rhinebeck and northern Hyde Park. Now, I would love to just leave you with this image, but instead, oh yes, I forgot that some of this has animation. So instead, we're going to explain how this works. So we're looking at the left-hand sheet of Mary Weiss's entry. I have broken down all of this squiggly text for you. But she's buying fabric, she's buying trimming, she's buying some tools, and she wants a nice fancy bonnet, which was a big deal in the 1760s and 1770s. You see some photos there of a reenactor wearing one and a reproduced one. So she wants cool clothes. Who doesn't, right? So how is she going to work all of this off? Because she is a woman, which means she probably doesn't have a huge amount of cash available to her. She can kind of own land in 18th century Dutchess County, but don't believe all those people who are like, oh yeah, women, equal protection under the law in the 18th century in New York. No, that's just what the lawyers want you to think. The credit, how is she going to counter that? She's going to counter that with labor. Now, we don't know precisely what form of labor she performed because the storekeeper didn't think that that was worth writing down. But what we do see is that she's got long-term arrangements, and that at least one of these arrangements was made in agreement with her father. The types of labor that we often see women doing during this period is housekeeping. And if anyone's like, oh my God, how demeaning. Well, yes, but maybe not in the way you think. Housekeeping is the same as you contracting with someone to clean your house. So if you can do it in the 18th century, if you can do it in the 21st century, I wish I could do it in the 21st century. You do it. So housekeeping is a whole thing, especially when you don't have all those nice appliances. The other thing that we see women doing a lot of from these books is textile manufacture. So they are weaving, they are carding wool into stuff that they can then subsequently spin into woolen yarn, and then they are knitting. They are knitting tons and tons and tons of stockings. Huge industry. Sheep and wool goes all the way back into the 18th century in Dutchess County. So that's a brief on how that record keeping works. Now, what do we have as far as the surviving leisure books for Dutchess County? And I am, never you fear, busily poking into every collection that I can get into trying to find more of these, because the hunger cannot be satisfied by just 4. First, we have the Mabbitt Store Ledger, which covers most of the towns of Washington, Stanford, Dover, and a section of Amenia. That's the area it serves, massive area. It covers entries from 1773 into 1774. That's the one that I've been transcribing into a database. Secondly, we have one for the Fish Kills, which is another name for Rombauer Precinct, which covers 1767 to 1771. I have scans of that one. I haven't begun entering all of this stuff yet, because this is a very long and involved process. We have the Peter DeWitt ledgers, which again cover that Statsburg area. They are up at New York State Archives. I've got a bunch of photographs of them, but not technically scans. And then finally, the Dutchess County Historical Society holds a fragment of a store ledger from Amenia in 1776, which happily preserves a bunch of sales of military equipment to the burgeoning United States Army. And the image there is the inside front page of the Fish Kills ledger, which, granted, you in the back probably just see blobs, but they like to doodle in the 18th century, and up at the top there are 2 heads of men, one wearing a wig, but one without, because I guess, you didn't have customers all the time in the shop, so you do what you gotta do to stay awake. All right, so the Mabbitt Store Ledger. This is the one that I've dealt with the most. This is the one that I can go into detail the most. And pretty much this system works the same across the board. Now, Joseph Mabbitt writes in the front of his ledger, God save the king and bless the land, in plenty, joy, and peace. God grant henceforth that foul debates twixt noblemen may cease, which makes him far better at rhyme scheme than I am. It also makes him a loyalist. Joseph disappears from the scene in 1776-ish. His relation Samuel Mabbitt takes over the store. The Mabbitts are a Long Island family. They first come up in the 1750s, and they establish this store pretty early on after that. There are 6 surviving Mabbitt store ledgers that cover the 1750s up to the 1790s. We have one of them here in Dutchess County. There is one out at the, what are they calling it? They did these days, the Farmers Museum in Cooperstown. And then there are a couple down at the New York Historical Society, which explains why I have a constant headache as Dutchess County historian, because I have to cast my mind over all of these places when I think about our past. But this one is cool because it is out in the Millbrook Historical Society, so easy to access. This is what it looks like. And pretty much all of these things look this way in terms of day books, because again, remember, day books, I know you all really love that double entry record keeping part. The day books, no, you do not have to worry about what goes on the left side and the right side. You just take those accounts down all day long. And what we find is that these stores are pretty rocking places in the 18th century. They only close on Sundays. And every other day, they are listing transactions. How many transactions, you might ask? But we'll get to that in a second. First, this is what the inside of it looks like. So imagine how many years of experience and training it has taken me to learn how to read this stuff. That is why I have been working away to turn that into this. Excel database. I learned how to do this stuff an embarrassingly long time ago. But this is what permits me to do some of the analysis that fuels the rest of our talk today, which is about the stuff. I know you're not as excited about the stuff as you were about the double entry bookkeeping. Let's try to keep our spirits up as we come into the final hall here. All right, as you can see, 1,719 transactions between June 30th and August 22nd, 1773. That is a lot of data, which I have all transcribed myself with my own eyes. So that's taken a long time. This runs until November of 1774. I have a long way to go. So check in regularly. But out of all of this, we've got a couple of outstanding things in terms of the most popular quantities and types of material. So our first one is food products, because guess what? Yes, most of you are farmers in 18th century Dutchess County. Congratulations. But your primary crop that you are growing, your cash crop, is wheat. An all-wheat diet gets very old very quickly. So you go to the Mabbitt store in this case to get all sorts of things, many of which cannot be made anywhere in Dutchess County. So tea, largely at this point in time, comes from India. You've got sugar that comes from the West Indies, and we have multiple different types and grades of sugar available for you at the Mabbitt store, which we'll touch upon a little bit later. And you have molasses, which might be the single most popular item purchased in the Mabbitt store, but there might actually be one that's slightly more popular, and they both come from the same place. I'm not going to give that away. Second, does anyone want to guess what the second most popular category is, and it relates to entertainment in 18th century Dutchess?
Liquor.
Yes, liquor. I was surprised that the food products outweigh the liquor. But the liquor transactions account for 22% of the purchases, and they keep going. And the ironic part is pretty much every time you come into the Mabbitt store as a 1773 Dutchess County person, you will be buying rum and molasses together. So that's why these occur so frequently. I don't know if the rum is just like super duper sour and they have to sweeten it up. There will be some commentary on that later. Then our third, textiles. Again, as Mary Weiss showed us, clothes are super duper important. Can you make cloth on your farm? Yes. Do you want to make cloth on your farm? Not really. And the most popular type of fabric that's coming out is linen, because that's what every shirt and shift is made from in the 18th century. So it's a very important fiber, and this fiber is coming out of Ireland, where still the best linen, if you can get it, is grown and produced today. So what do some of these things look like? Because it's not just buying rum and molasses all the time, although it kind of feels that way after the first 1,500 entries that you transcribe. In this case, for example, we have Michael Byrne, maybe his last name is Burns, and he appears to be buying material to have a coat made. They did have sort of equivalent to, Target and Walmart, finer clothing stores where they had pre-made clothing for your purchase. But if you were anyone of any standing, basically if you were above the level of a sailor, and my God, you want to be above the level of a sailor, you are having your clothes tailored to fit you, which means first you go to the store to get the stuff, and then you bring the stuff to the tailor to actually turn it into your breeches, your coat, etc. This guy's probably having a coat made. He's got a type of refined wool called moraine there. Shaloon is the lining. The mohair twist is what is used to sew it all together. The skeins of silk are for the buttonholes. The buckram is interfacing to keep everything nice and fresh, because in the 18th century you want to build sort of an artificial body. You don't want to show the actual body underneath. They had a whole different idea of body image. They're like, don't worry about exercise, we'll just cut your clothes really nice. Lots of interface. I do much better in the 18th century. And then of course a dram thread kind of cut off down at the bottom. This is what Lori looks like, because we still have some businesses that are making old-timey fabrics today. And other types that show up, calico, cambric, various types of linen, some cottons. Nankeen is so called because it is a cotton fabric that comes from China, which is available to you courtesy of the British Empire in 1773. So that's fabric, that's cool, that's wonderful, but we're all really here for the thick. Yes. Now I have to caution you, before you think they were partying oh so hard in 18th century Dutchess County, and the level of bastardy cases in the ancient documents does kind of suggest that there was a lot of partying in 18th century Dutchess County. One of the issues is the rum is being bought in very, relatively small quantities. Most of these purchases are for a half a gallon. Some are for a pint, occasionally you get a gallon. So probably they're not using it so much for knocking the edge off today's wheat harvest. They're probably using it in food preparation and preservation. So yes, somewhat less exciting. But when it comes to the spirits, the wine, the brandy, yes, the party is on. None of this stuff even comes from North America. Brandy comes from Portugal. It is a fortified wine during this period. And of course, wine is basically anywhere. France, Spain, Portugal, not so much England anymore. They're still trying at this point, but they're not successful. And included in all of this are bottles to take it away, because that's the thing. They are not selling this stuff in bottles. It's not like going to a liquor store today. They have it in huge casks, hogsheads, behind that counter, and they will decant it for you. So either you bring a jug or a bottle with you, or, as was often the case, you see them buying rum and buying a glass bottle to take it home with. So that's what I call vertical integration of supply chain. Now we have this note over here, which is part of the network analysis stuff that I was mentioning. So it's not just that Thomas Casey goes up and they're like, okay, you're gonna buy this for yourself, all right, great, we're gonna list you. A lot of people will come and buy on someone else's account. And this person, in this case, is probably an enslaved young man of color, in the period parlance, a Negro boy, who has been sent to the Mabbott store to buy rum on behalf of his master, Thomas Casey. This is how, as somewhat undigestible as it is, we have proof of enslaved people in Dutchess County. It's because they show up in these ledgers. They don't show up so much in censuses before the U.S. starts doing them in 1790. We also have indigenous people who are recorded in these censuses buying on accounts, and we have a whole bunch of stuff of guys buying on each other's accounts. And we're still not sure, at least I'm not sure, if this is just like, I'll go to the store for Bill, or I'll go to the store, my credit's out, so I will say, Bill, let me use his credit. It's not entirely clear. So ceramics, my little personal obsession, but not just for me, also for 18th century people, because there is no plastic, so it's going to be glass, it's going to be some form of clay, or it's going to be iron, and iron teacups just don't have the same feel as ceramic ones. Now the important thing about the teacups and the teapots that we see in here, in addition to massive quantities of tea being sold, is it shows that even though we are the smallest population-wise of these counties during the period, we're considered underdeveloped, according to our colleagues over in Ulster County, from period letters. You're still getting high status stuff shipped into the middle of Dutchess County. It cannot get there by water. It has to be taken overland on roads that are more like footpaths. But you can buy it at the Mabbitt store, and you can buy it also at all these other stores. Of course, if you don't want the really good stuff, if you want something for just like cooking in the fire, you can get what is called in the period earthenware, which can be actually made locally. And we have signs that it is made locally because some stuff that is sold at these stores is made in Dutchess County because we flagrantly disobeyed British law and figured out how to do some things that we were not supposed to do or even be able to do. Making ceramics is not the worst violation, but it is still a violation. Anyway, that's what some of these earthen cook pots would have looked like. Then we get into the real violation categories. So the whole idea of Eastern Dutchess is that it is an area rich in iron ore. Now what you're supposed to do as a good British subject, not citizen, citizens don't have kings and queens. You're supposed to mine this stuff out. It's pig iron. It's like just full of all sorts of impurities, very problematic. At best, you are supposed to melt it down into basically an ingot and then ship it back to England, where real operations, like in Sheffield, will turn it into pots and cooking spiders and super duper cool knives and forks that will then be sold back to you at a significant markup, because that's how empires were. However, in 18th century Dutchess County, we do have signs that, actually, we have blast furnaces that are refining this material into something that can actually be used to make stuff on the spot. So this stuff, English manufactured goods. This stuff, which is far more in demand, scythes and sickles, made here in Dutchess County. There is the Harris Scythe Works up in Pine Plains, or what is now Pine Plains, which does have a historical marker if you're driving east on 199. They are turning out large quantities of sickles and scythes for use. In fact, that's how he pays his bills at the Mabbitt store ledger, or Mabbitt store. He rolls up, and he's like, I want this, this, and this. Go out in the back and get the 20 scythes that I made for you. And then, of course, Mabbitt turns around and sells them, which gives you, again, another idea of how you pay off your bills at these stores. You are not supposed to be doing this according to the British Crown. This is a huge no-no. Buy your Sheffield steel sickles and scythes, not made in Dutchess County. And this is a period image of how this stuff is working. Granted, those in the front row, you might have a good view. Those in the back, my apologies. Always in search of a bigger screen as well. But this is what most of Dutchess County's laboring age folks would have been doing in the 18th century. Sowing wheat, managing the fields, and then at the end of the season, harvesting it. And you don't use a scythe to harvest. That's the big thing on the left there. It's mostly for cutting grass. The stuff up on the right there, the sickles, because you cut at the base of the wheat and then pile it into these wheat sheaves. So if you go to England and you're like, why are all the bars named wheat sheaves? That's why. A lot of their laboring people were doing the same thing. And this is Joseph Harris's Scythe Works. You see him, or just take my word for it that you see this. If you got up close and personal, he shows up with 36 scythes. It's 14 pounds of credit. This is a period of time where a common laborer, if it's been a good year, will make 4 pounds. That's his total equivalent income. And he's getting linen, he's getting spirits, he's getting a sharpening stone, all this stuff for a grand total of 1 pound, 8 shillings, 9 pence. So he's rolling out with about 12 pounds of credit still on his account. He does very well for himself. Now, food products. What do you get at the store? Well, you get salt, because yes, there are salt licks in Dutchess County in the 18th century, but those are for the animals, not for the people. And you can buy salt in packages instead, so why not? You get tobacco. It's grown in the South. then dried, and sent to England where it's processed, repackaged, sent back here to be sold. You get sugar, that comes from the West Indies. Now, how do they make sugar? They grow sugar cane, and they crush it in massive presses. They put it into these clay pots that you can see at the top there, and that's how you get your brown sugar, your white sugar, and your molasses. The molasses is all of the liquid that pours out of that mold into the jar below it and is then refined. That jar produces these sugar loaves, which you see on the bottom there. Archetypally, what will happen, there varies in summary, detailed, nuanced considerations for this, but you'll get the brown sugar towards the base, that being the wide end of the sugar loaf, and the white sugar towards the top. So that is loaf sugar, but in these account books, we see loaf sugar, we see fine sugar, we see several other grades of sugar. So you have options depending on your budget. And of course, that's bohea tea or bohea tea, depending on which camp you're in, and it's raw form. That's coming out of India. All right, other food products that we see, because you want to know what's on those store shelves. So many raisins. Now, I'm a raisin aficionado as well as a ceramics aficionado, so I get it. You're also getting plums. I don't know about growing plums in 18th century Dutchess County. Lots of pork, because pork during this period is the easiest meat to preserve. You salt it, you put it in enormous barrels, you ship it out of Cork, Ireland for the most part. It's truth is stranger than fiction, folks. That's also why I'm a historian. And you move it all over the place, and it lasts for months and months and months and months and months, sometimes way too long. Then you have things like, oh, pepper. Yes, you can get that in 18th century Dutchess County. You can also get chocolate. If you're a chocoholic and you find yourself magically transported Outlander style to the 18th century, you can get chocolate. Beware though, it's not sweetened. Hershey has not come onto the scene yet. This is Baker's chocolate, not the brand. It's what Baker's use. So add some sugar to that. You get cloves, you get cinnamon. You've got most of the spice rack in Hannaford's available to you, at least the real staples. There's also allspice thrown in here and other sorts of stuff. So, last slide. You've been an excellent audience. I don't want to take you too far, but this is where the social network stuff comes in. So we saw earlier where there's a note that a probably enslaved young man is sent to buy on his enslaver/master's behalf. Here we see the buddies who are trading things back and forth. So a guy named John Butt, and the Butt family is not funny, though I struggle not to laugh at it, especially because there is a road called Butt's Corner. They're big in eastern town of Washington, but here you have John Butt. He's bought a gallon of spirits. Now, are these drinking spirits or are these like mineral spirits? We're not entirely sure. They knew what they were talking about. They didn't care that it will take them 200 years from now. That is what we're talking about. But he buys it on the account of his buddy Thomas. And then we have Thomas Mason a few lines further down, who's buying some check linen on the account of John Butt. Yeah, Butt's Hollow Road also has a stop sign next to it, so if you read it in a certain order, it says stop Butt's Hollow Road. It kills me every time. But eventually, when I transcribe all, I don't even want to think about how many hundreds of pages of this stuff, there is software that will allow you to build these models that represent who's connected to who. And usually we use either ledger books or baptismal records to build these networks. But what we do see is that there are a whole lot of people who are close enough to use each other's lines of credit, and it gives us an idea, in the absence of family records, correspondence, and other stuff, who might be friends in 18th century Dutchess County. So that is, and of course, how many times, this is one of my favorites, again, excuse my sense of humor, how many times the daughter is going to the store and buying stuff, especially rum and molasses. I don't know how those go together. Maybe there's a food historian here, but a lot of that going on. So that is our presentation tonight. I'm happy to take a few questions. There's my contact information. If you want to help yourself get you refreshed artifacts. John is up there. Are there any questions? Don't feel pressured. Yes, sir.
How do they determine the value of something? Does it have like a price tag up there, and therefore you put it on as credit?
How do they determine the value of an item? So when you roll up and say, I want a gallon of rum, and then the person behind the counter says, do you want New York rum, or do you want rum? Because those are different prices. How do you establish those prices? My personal suspicion is, and these prices are stable, so they're not moving a whole lot, even though I've only got 2 months of data, but I don't start to skip ahead a little bit at times. They don't move a whole lot. My suspicion is they have standard formula for figuring out how much something should cost, based probably both on how much it costs the store to get it in the first place, and then how much it costs to transport it. Because transporting overland is a profound pain in every part of your body in the 18th century. So much so that some of the folks in this ledger work off their debts by moving goods around Dutchess County on behalf of the Mavic store. So, very expensive, but that's the best guess I can provide on pricing. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm curious about the fact that, knowing about the Mizzier homestead and all, that the famous Wappingers Tea Party took place. And it was over a controversy of the tea being too much and several of the other items that they'd have to get that were all British. Now, if they didn't have money involved in this whole thing, why was there such a protest over it? If there wasn't actual money.
Well, if this happened, one thing that I could think that might provoke it is if Mizzier stopped carrying credit for people. If he's requiring folks to get some entries on the credit side of his double entry bookkeeping really fast. Normally when we see debt suits in Dutchess County, and courtesy of the ancient documents, I have seen thousands of debt suits. And they're normally not that interesting because they're for an amount of money, or my favorite, diverse goods, services, and wares, which tells you basically nothing except that they're shopping at a store. These debts can be as much as 10 years old by the time they make it to the court. So a lot of these store owners are carrying credit for a long time for people. So if you decide that I want to stock my store with X, Y, and Z that these people have, and I don't want to wait months or years for it, that can make people very upset, especially in wartime, because 1777, the British start coming up the Hudson River. First, they hit Peekskill in May of 1777, and they burn an entire Continental Army depot, comparable to the Fishkill Supply Depot, down there. Then in September of 1777, they hear that, oh, John Burgoyne is coming down from Canada, so the British have a massive expedition that comes up, takes the Twin Forts at Bear Mountain, shoots up basically everything that they can see from the river, including the Livingston House at Poughkeepsie, which the Dutchess County Historical Society has a timber that shows the passage of a cannonball through it, and Washington's headquarters at Newburgh actually has the cannonball. They burn Kingston, they burn Claremont, the Livingston family seat. This is a really stressful time where you're not sure if the British are going to sail by, if they're going to come back again, if they're going to land troops and burn everything that they can reach within a day's travel from the river and back, because they're sleeping on their ships. So in that sort of context of heightened tension, I conceive that if Mizzier is charging more than people want to pay, if he's demanding that the credit be offset by some form of in-kind payment ASAP at the same time that everyone's worried about the British, that could lead to some form of protest. Or people are just like, it's May 1777, where have you been? Why are you moving up here now? The British Army has had New York City since August of 1776. We need stuff, you won't give it to us, you're new. There's all sorts of ways that they have played out. This is why I'm anxious to hear many sources that folks might run across from the 1770s about this. Yes, sir, John.
So, did you see in the ledger anywhere, what point does it start
hard to transition from a ledger of goods and services to coins. Is that like documented, or like what happens when, if it's illegal to do using coins, and it just starts to turn to coins, do you see those payments start to be coins?
In this ledger itself, the Mabbott ledger, which is 1773 to 1774, we do see some people who are shown as coming in and paying off their debt in cash. It is listed as cash, which they aren't supposed to do. But in terms of cash payments becoming the norm, I've looked at this stuff pretty closely up to the 1790s, and it's still in kind. The farmers are coming in and paying off their debts with wheat, they're paying off their debts with tallow, with honey, they're bringing in steers, cows for beef. Lots and lots of flaxseed. That's one of the big things in northern Dutchess, and evidently it's a commodity that was traded globally in the late 18th century. Don't entirely know what they're doing with it, but coin becomes dominant only really second, third quarter of the 19th century. Still largely an in-kind economy until the full impact of the Erie Canal is felt, and also really having a national bank helps with that, and a national mint, and that takes Andrew Jackson coming in and saying, you know what, it's not such a bad thing to copy the British in that regard. So yeah, that's a whole nother set of history. But at this point, okay, one more question, one last one.
Would these store owners be selling the wheat that people are paying? If the farmers are bringing the store owner wheat, is the store owner then selling it maybe to New York City or to other brokers, or do you see that, or have you seen that in the ledgers?
We don't see that in these ledgers because these are particular to the operations that are happening directly at that store, but yes, they must be shipping that down to New York City because it's the same thing that the landlords do. They are receiving their rent in wheat, and the whole idea is that the British Empire has a lot of people that it needs to feed in areas where they aren't growing wheat. So this is at the same time that Dutchess County is connected to a global economic structure in the 1760s and 1770s for receiving things, it is also in that same for sending things. So there are people in Ireland and the Caribbean colonies that are being fed with New York wheat, because it's easier to transport the wheat than it is to transport baked bread. Well, thank you all. I will be here, so if you have questions, feel free to come up. But thank you all very much. Thank you all.